person has injured me, this person. When you have a divorce, are there other legal actions that can be coupled with the divorce that you can bring to the court?
Absolutely. In fact, you have to. Under a legal principle called the entire controversy doctrine, if a person getting a divorce has a cause of action, like a personal injury case, an assault, a rape, any type of an injury, a personal injury, they have to bring it at the time of the divorce or that it's waived. And that includes things such as the emotional infliction of emotional infliction of distress.
The intentional infliction
of emotional distress, right. Battered women.
Okay.
Or battered person is a better term. And you have to bring them. And in those particular cases, you can even ask for a jury.
Really?
If it's a significant enough case, and it's a case, personal injury case within a divorce case.
Now, is there a jury just for a regular divorce case?
No, not in New Jersey. There's maybe 1 or 2 states in the country that permit it, but New Jersey does not. And that personal injury case is often segregated, or I should say bifurcated, and is dealt with separately. Sometimes in a different court, and sometimes before the same judge.
Okay. So we have the possibility of bringing other actions.
Absolutely.
But in the divorce itself, what are some typical issues?
Well, obviously the most important is anyone who has children. So the issue of custody is paramount. And it's probably the most serious issue that the courts will consider. In New Jersey, there are 2 levels of custody. On the top level, I call that the decision-making level. And it's the policy of the state to be joint legal custodians of the children. So both parents have an equal say in major decisions. The other, if you can't get joint legal, is what they call sole custody, where one parent makes all the decisions. The legislature has said that children really should have both parents making decisions. So there has to be serious deficits in a parent not to become the joint legal custodian. But sometimes it's warranted. That's the first level. The second level is the physical level, and that's where the children are at a given point in time. There are 2 basic ways of approaching it. One is the more traditional, and we call that the primary parent and the secondary parent. Okay? And that's typically where it used to be called custody and visitation. Those were the old terms. We don't use it anymore because when you're with your children, you're not visiting, you're co-parenting. So it's primary and secondary. Those are the typical ones where the children stay with one parent pretty much during the week and the parties alternate weekends. The other type is a shared parenting where it's more of a 50-50. It might be 60-40, 70-30, but it's certainly a lot more than the first type I've described. A 1 week on and 1 week off, 3 days on, 4 off, maybe 1 overnight midweek and 2 evenings, but more of a hands-on. I'm seeing that more and more these days because as more couples where they both work, you find both parents participating more and raising children more together than in the past, where it used to be a stay-at-home parent and then a working parent.
When these custody issues are taken into account by a court, does the court think, well, what can we do best to make the parent's life easy, or do they take the child's needs as the first consideration?
Well, the standard that all courts use, and this is almost uniform around the country, is whatever is in the best interests of the child. The courts don't necessarily care what mom wants or what dad wants. They look at the child or children and say, what's best for them? And that's their charge. That's their goal.
So those are custody issues. What about support issues for the child?
Well, there's 2 types of support. One is child support, and the other is spousal support. Now, on child support, there are child support guidelines, and all the states have these guidelines, and they're based on socioeconomic studies which would indicate how much a percentage of the combined income of the family would be spent on children. Different, obviously the higher the income, the percentage might be smaller because they have more discretionary spending. And you look at the guidelines, it's dependent on the incomes of both parties, the amount of time that each parent spends with a child, okay, and whether there's spousal support being paid. Because when you calculate child support, you have to subtract the alimony or spousal support from the paying person and put it over to the receiving person, and then run the child support guidelines. If anybody wants to know, to look at them, you can go on the government website, New Jersey State Gov, And they actually have the guidelines there, or there are programs that you can buy.
Can we try it with just fake names to just get the point clearly across? Let's just say Jane and John.
Okay.
And now John will be paying to Jane alimony. John makes $50,000 a year. He will be paying her, let's say, 20 grand, 15 grand out of the year. That means that when Jane's numbers are calculated, she's imputed an extra 15 or 20 grand income, right?
Correct.
And then that will affect the child support that comes from John, because his income goes down because he's paying spousal
The
support.
more alimony you pay, the less child support.
Very
Okay?
simple.
Yeah. You know, and then the second, and by the way, it's difficult sometimes because sometimes people are underemployed or unemployed, and or there's a stay-at-home parent. And in those cases, what the courts will do is they'll impute income. That means that they'll assign amount of income to them as though they were working to their abilities. And you look at the New Jersey labor statistics to find out in their vocation, if they had a vocation before they stopped working, what they'd be earning, and that's what they assign. Okay? And it's not always, you know, what they are earning at the time if they're underemployed. For example, if there was a doctor who 6 months before filing for divorce gave up a lucrative medical practice and worked at Home Depot.
Right.
Right? The court would say, wait, you can't do that. And they would impute income at what
So
his
you
old
can't
income was.
Pull the wool over the eyes of
Right,
the
you
court.
can't hide from it, no.
I
And
see.
judges are very savvy, and they've seen every trick, almost every trick.
Well, what about people who are trying to avoid not paying maybe alimony or child support, but insurance and education, medical expenses? Does that come into play in a divorce?
Well, yeah, there certainly are other expenses, but the alimony, though, just need to explain that there are three basic types of alimony.
Okay.
And that's a big factor. One is what they call permanent alimony, and that's until death or remarriage or retirement. The second is what they call rehabilitative alimony. That's for a period of years to enable the dependent spouse to get training, skills, back in the job market. And the third type is what they call limited duration alimony, which is for just a period of years until it's no longer appropriate. That type is usually for shorter term marriages where it would be unfair for a dependent spouse who got accustomed to a lifestyle and after a short marriage it just stopped and they would fall off a cliff, so to speak. This sort of lets them down gently till they can reestablish a new lifestyle.
I'm guessing some of our viewers are thinking, well, we're in a bad economic time right now, and there are some people who have either lost their jobs or had their salaries cut. Once you memorialize these child support numbers or alimony numbers, are they locked in forever?
No. If there is a substantial change of circumstances so that it's unreasonable to enforce either an agreement between the parties or a court order, there's a mechanism to go back into court and ask for a modification. And the judges are not all that quick to modify support orders if somebody just loses a job, because unemployment is generally short term. And most people rebound after becoming unemployed, and the judges will look to see whether or not that person has tried hard enough to get back the job at the same level. And if they can't reach that level and they're down a little bit lower, then the court will utilize the lower figure so long as they're convinced that they really tried and couldn't achieve the higher amount.
So we've gone through alimony and child support, and we were talking about some insurance issues and education issues. How does that
All
get
right,
worked
life
out?
insurance, the courts generally will require life insurance to provide for the children in the event of a parent's death, which would be to pay their support, as well as to provide for future college expenses. Life insurance is also required in most cases where there's alimony, so that if the person paying alimony were to die prematurely, there would be insurance to cover the alimony payments. All right, so that's usually a component. Medical insurance, it's both parents' responsibility to pay medical for a child. You don't have to pay medical for an ex-spouse, because that's all figured into the alimony. But on the child